Under the dazzling lights of the grand conference hall, voices mingled in a hum of ambition, but beneath the polished surface of polite applause, something far more dangerous was waiting to unfold. Sophie Turner sat halfway back in the rows of velvet chairs, her pen tapping against her notebook with restless rhythm. She had promised herself she would simply listen this time, keep her head down, and not attract unnecessary attention, but the words pouring from the man on stage felt like cold knives, slicing away at everything she loved most: numbers, profits, algorithms, efficiency. He spoke of books as though they were commodities to be weighed, stripped, and sold in sterile packages, and every sentence dug into her chest until she could no longer remain silent. Her voice rose, bright and clear, ringing through the hushed air like a bell that refused to be ignored. Faces turned toward her. Nathan Blackwood, the formidable CEO with his reputation for ruthlessness, froze mid-sentence. His eyes, dark as onyx and sharp as glass, locked onto hers. Sophie's breath quickened, but her chin remained lifted, her words pressing forward with unstoppable force. Books were not just profit, they were memory, warmth, healing. They were the scent of childhood nights, the comfort of quiet mornings, the soul of humanity written across pages. A ripple of whispers coursed through the audience, but she no longer heard them. She felt only the searing heat of Nathan's gaze, as if he were branding her with the audacity of her defiance. The silence that followed was like the stillness before a storm. Nathan stepped down from the podium, his steps measured, his composure unbroken. Yet the tension in his jaw revealed more than his cool voice ever could. He stopped beside her row, leaned down close enough that only she could hear, and whispered in a low growl meant to slice her into silence. But Sophie did not flinch. Her lips parted, and her reply burned hotter than his warning. And that was when he broke. In a motion so sudden, the world gasped. Nathan bent down and pressed his lips against hers. The hall dissolved into stunned silence. Sophie's eyes flew wide, her pulse crashing like 1,000 waves against the fragile shore of her chest. His kiss was not tender. It was sharp, electrifying, commanding, a ruthless attempt to strip her of her words. But what he could not have predicted was the fire that kiss would ignite, not only in her lips, but in her very soul. Her body trembled, not from weakness, but from the rush of something she had never known could burn so bright in a moment of outrage. When he pulled away, his face remained inscrutable, his deep voice slicing the quiet with chilling calm. Finally, silence. The room erupted in whispers, laughter barely contained, disbelief dripping from every corner. Sophie's face flushed scarlet, her heart pounding against the cage of her ribs. "You're insane!" she cried, her voice trembling not just with fury, but with something unnamed, something wild. The world was spinning, and yet she stood rooted, her lips still tingling with the echo of the moment that would change everything. That night, alone in her small apartment, she replayed it over and over, cursing him, cursing herself, and yet feeling the phantom warmth of his mouth lingering like a dangerous secret she could not erase. Nathan, however, did not sleep easily in his penthouse above the glittering skyline. He told himself it had been nothing more than an impulsive act, a method of control against a woman who spoke too much. But as he stood by the window, the city sprawling endlessly beneath him, her voice echoed in his mind. When was the last time you read a book for joy, not profit? The words slipped past his defences like a key turning in a lock he had long forgotten existed. He despised noise, yet he could not silence the memory of her defiant eyes, the spark in her voice, or the taste that still lingered on his lips. The days that followed only deepened the tension between them. Their paths crossed again at another event, and once more Sophie's voice shattered the calm, challenging his every statement. He found himself waiting for it, her interruption, her unyielding fire, the way she stripped his polished arguments down to raw truth. Each retort was a wound, but one he could not help but crave. And Sophie, no matter how much she told herself she despised him, could not keep her heart from trembling whenever his shadow fell across her. In the quiet moments, she thought of how infuriatingly composed he seemed, how his silence was as sharp as her words. And beneath her frustration lay a pull she refused to name. For Nathan, every glance, every word from her lips was a reminder of the kiss he had tried to dismiss as nothing. But he knew. Deep inside, he knew it was already too late. That single reckless kiss had become an addiction, and no amount of denial could break it. Their story was no longer one of mere defiance. It was a storm brewing between two souls unwilling to bend, each clash pulling them deeper into a gravity neither could escape. Sophie was the fire Nathan had spent years trying to extinguish from his life, and Nathan was the challenge Sophie had never imagined fate would set in her path. And as they stood on opposite sides of their endless arguments, both of them were blind to the truth glowing fiercely beneath their fury, that the most dangerous wars are fought not with words, but with hearts. If you feel the spark of this journey, let your voice join ours. Leave a comment, share your thoughts, and subscribe so that this tale of love, healing, and fire can continue to reach hearts everywhere. Because stories like these are more than fiction. They are reminders of how light always finds its way into even the coldest silence. And as Sophie and Nathan take their first steps into a battle neither of them will ever win. One truth glimmers like a hidden flame. Sometimes the kiss meant to silence becomes the beginning of the loudest love of all. The morning after the scandalous conference felt like a blur of restless thoughts and unsteady breaths. Sophie woke in her small apartment with sunlight spilling through sheer curtains, the warmth brushing her skin like a gentle whisper of healing after a storm. She stretched, pressing her palms against the sheets, but her mind refused to be soothed. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his face, sharp, composed, utterly unshaken, and felt the echo of that stolen kiss that had shaken her world. She whispered to herself that it had meant nothing, that he was arrogant, controlling, unbearable. Yet her heart betrayed her with every uneven beat, humming with the memory she wished to erase. Meanwhile, in his towering penthouse above the glittering skyline, Nathan Blackwood sat at a polished oak table, files spread neatly before him, but unread. His eyes wandered toward the wide glass windows, where the city sprawled like an endless machine built on profit and logic. Yet for once, numbers could not hold his focus. Instead, Sophie's defiant eyes flashed in his mind, brighter than city lights, and her voice lingered like a melody he could not mute. He hated noise, but her words had carved themselves into the silence he had spent years constructing. Some things can't be measured by profit. Against his will, he found himself remembering not just her words, but the stubborn tilt of her chin, the spark in her tone, the fire that had burned against his cold composure. Fate proved merciless when days later Sophie walked into her publishing house to discover the new project on her desk. A manuscript thick with promise, funded directly by Blackwood Technologies. And at the head of the table during the kick-off meeting sat Nathan, crisp white shirt and dark tie, his face a mask of authority. The moment their eyes met, Sophie felt her breath stutter, but she forced herself to walk forward with steady steps. She would not show weakness in front of him. Their gazes locked across the table, the air between them vibrating with unspoken challenge. The meeting quickly became a battlefield. Nathan criticized the cover design as too elaborate. Sophie fired back that it captured the soul of the story. He countered that emotions don't pay printing costs. She answered that profit cannot buy childhood memories. Their colleagues sat frozen, watching sparks fly, unsure whether to laugh or hide. But Nathan's lips curved ever so faintly, as though her defiance was the very thing he craved. Sophie's cheeks burned, not just from anger, but from the strange heat that surged through her every time he leaned close, every time his deep voice cut into her thoughts. Even outside the boardroom, their collisions were endless. In hallways, in elevators, even at the cafe near the office. Once, while Sophie waited in line for coffee, Nathan's voice rumbled behind her, amused. "Let's hope you don't spill it on me again." She spun around, glaring, but her pulse betrayed her, beating too quickly for her own comfort. In the cramped elevator, the silence between them grew thick, her arms crossed while her heart raced uncontrollably. Nathan's voice slid into the quiet, low and steady, almost vulnerable. "Are you really planning to never forgive me?" Sophie snapped her eyes toward him, blazing with fury. "Yes, I told you I never will." But the faint curve of his lips, the glint in his gaze, told her he wasn't afraid. He was intrigued. Late nights became their battlefield too. Sophie hunched over manuscripts, her red pen leaving trails of passion across every page. Nathan sat beside her, jacket removed, sleeves rolled, his sharp eyes dissecting lines with precision. The silence was heavy, charged, broken only by the rustle of papers and the ticking of a clock. When he declared a section too slow, Sophie's head snapped up, her eyes alive with fire. "Stories need room to breathe," she shot back. He looked at her then, unblinking, the air between them taut as a bowstring. She should have stopped. She should have swallowed her words. But she couldn't. "If you think I'm wrong, prove it." The challenge ignited something inside him. Nathan rose, circling the table, his tall frame looming over her, pressing her back into her chair. His voice, low and dangerous, slid into her ears like smoke. "You really don't know when to stop, do you?" she whispered, trembling but unbroken. "That's right. And I won't." His hands gripped her shoulders, his restraint shattering, and his lips claimed hers with a fierceness that left no space for air. This was not a kiss meant to silence. This was fire, raw and consuming, every hidden desire breaking free. For a heartbeat, Sophie's body betrayed her, lips trembling against his, her heart thundering as though it might burst. Then reason snapped her back. She shoved him hard, slapped him across the face and fled, her steps echoing down the corridor. Nathan stood frozen, his cheeks stinging, but instead of anger, a smile tugged faintly at his lips. The taste of her lingered, and with it the dangerous knowledge that he was already addicted. Sophie stormed into her apartment, tossing her bag aside, her chest rising and falling in ragged breaths. She hated him. She hated his arrogance, his audacity, his kisses that stole her voice. But what she hated most was the truth her heart whispered in the quiet, that she had responded, if only for a breath, to the fire he had unleashed. She pressed her palms over her face, whispering to herself words of healing, promises of strength. Yet inside she trembled with a confusion she could not shake. Across the hall, in a twist of cruel fate, another door opened. Nathan stepped out, casual for once in a plain shirt, a grocery bag in hand. Sophie froze, horror rushing through her veins as the realization struck. He had moved in across from her. Their war was no longer confined to offices and conferences. It had invaded her home. Their evenings became a dance of sharp words and stolen glances, passing each other in the hallway with trash bags in hand, standing on opposite balconies under the glow of city lights, their bickering masking the quiet truth that both were already falling. Each clash left Sophie rattled, her heart pounding too fast for her comfort, her body craving the silence of peace, but finding only his presence at every turn. And for Nathan, whose life had been built on cold numbers and silent control, Sophie's storm became the only thing that made his days feel alive. He told himself she was nothing but a distraction, an adversary. But deep down, he already knew the truth. She was the battle he had never wanted, yet could no longer live without. And so, beneath the thin walls of their adjoining apartments, two hearts beat louder with every passing night, carrying them toward a truth neither dared to speak aloud. What began as defiance was already transforming into something far more dangerous. Desire disguised as war, affection hidden beneath fury, and the first quiet thread of love weaving its way into the firestorm they both refused to escape. The city's skyline shimmered like a crown of glass that night, every tower glowing against the velvet dark. Sophie walked quickly, her heels striking the pavement in sharp rhythm, her heart still unsettled after yet another day of working under Nathan's relentless gaze. She had told herself she would not let him unnerve her, that she would treat him as nothing more than a colleague. An impossible colleague, perhaps, but a colleague nonetheless. Yet every time his voice slid into the silence of a meeting, every time his eyes caught hers across a table, she felt her composure crack like thin ice. Back in her apartment, Sophie collapsed onto the couch, clutching a book to her chest. The familiar scent of paper soothed her like a gentle balm, yet even the comforting embrace of words could not drown out the memory of his lips against hers. The second kiss, hotter, fiercer, more dangerous than the first, still pulsed in her veins, a rhythm her body could not forget, no matter how fiercely her mind demanded she erase it. She replayed the moment again and again, torn between fury and the aching sweetness that refused to fade. Healing, she told herself, came from time. But what if time only deepened the scar? Nathan, too, sat restless in his penthouse, the silence of his home a sharp contrast to the storm in his chest. He had faced ruthless competitors, boardrooms filled with men twice his age, partners who betrayed him without hesitation. He had conquered all of it with cold logic and iron will. But this woman, this small, fiery editor with her endless voice and her defiant gaze, had undone him with nothing more than a slap, and the taste of her lips lingering like a forbidden secret. He touched his cheek where her hand had landed, but instead of pain, he felt warmth. And in that warmth, he recognized the danger. Sophie Turner had become the one battle he did not want to win. Their next confrontation came sooner than either had prepared for. At the office, Sophie stood before a wall of storyboards, red pen in hand, explaining to the team why each design needed more heart. Nathan stepped into the room silently, his presence a shadow that pulled every gaze. The discussion faltered, tension weaving itself instantly through the air. "Efficiency matters more than elaborate covers," he remarked, his voice deep, calm, precise. Sophie turned, her eyes sparking. "Efficiency doesn't stir the soul." A story begins the moment a reader touches the book. The room stilled, waiting for his reply. But Nathan only studied her for a long moment, the faintest flicker of something unreadable in his eyes, before saying, "Then prove it. Show me a design that can make even me feel something." Those words lingered with Sophie long after the meeting ended. That night, she stayed late at the office, sketching drafts and scribbling notes, pouring every ounce of passion into her work. She wanted to win, not for pride, not for revenge, but because deep inside she wanted him to see, to feel, to believe that books could carry healing as much as knowledge. The office grew quiet, the city lights painting golden threads across the windows. And then she realized she was no longer alone. Nathan stood behind her, his tie loosened, his sleeves rolled, his gaze sharp, yet strangely softened by the dim glow of the room. "You're still here," he said, his voice lower than usual, carrying not command, but something quieter. Sophie straightened, pen poised like a sword. "I have work to finish. Not everyone leaves when the clock strikes." His lips curved faintly, almost amused. He stepped closer, studying her sketches with a gaze that lingered longer on her than on the paper. "You talk too much," he murmured. Sophie shot him a glare, but her heart raced with a traitorous rhythm. "And you talk too little. Maybe that's why the universe keeps throwing us together, to balance each other out." The air between them thickened. Nathan reached for one of her sketches, his hand brushing hers. The touch was brief, accidental, yet Sophie felt heat bloom through her skin, like fire spreading through dry wood. She snatched her hand back, but the damage was already done. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the world outside the glass walls ceased to exist. Nathan's voice dropped, rough with something he could not mask. "You make me forget silence." Before she could respond, before she could steady her trembling breath, he moved closer. His presence surrounded her, the smoky scent of cedar and warmth filling every fragile space between them. Sophie's lips parted in protest, but the words died as Nathan bent and claimed her mouth once more. This kiss was not about silencing her. It was hunger, raw and consuming, his lips pressing hard against hers, his hands anchoring her as though he feared she would vanish. For a heartbeat, Sophie froze, torn between fury and surrender. But then her body betrayed her again, trembling lips responding with a desperate sweetness she could not control. The kiss deepened, wild and unrestrained, their breaths mingling, their hearts pounding in uneven rhythm. Sophie's hands curled against his chest, feeling the thundering beat beneath his shirt, a rhythm that betrayed how hard he was fighting to contain himself. The world blurred, melted, and for one dangerous moment she allowed herself to drown in it, to taste what it meant to be wanted with such intensity. But reason, sharp and unyielding, cut through the haze. She shoved him back, her hand striking across his cheek with sharp finality. The sound cracked the silence, leaving the room heavy with echoes. Her chest heaved, her eyes blazing. "Don't you ever do that again," she whispered, voice trembling with a mix of fury and fear. She clutched the manuscript to her chest, turned sharply, and stormed out of the office, her footsteps fierce against the marble floor. Nathan remained where he stood, his cheek stinging, his lips still tingling with the sweetness of her resistance. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even surprised. Instead, he let out a long, unsteady breath, the faintest smile curving his mouth, because through the sting of the slap he had tasted truth. He no longer kissed Sophie to silence her. He kissed her because he could not stop himself. That night, Sophie tossed in bed, tangled in sheets, her body restless, her mind replaying the kiss she wanted to forget. She pressed her palms to her face, whispering to herself words of strength, of calm, of healing. Yet her lips still trembled, her heart still raced with every memory. Across the hall, Nathan sat in his apartment, the city quiet beyond his windows, his glass of whiskey untouched. For years he had built walls around himself, walls that no one had dared to scale. But Sophie Turner, with her endless words and firelit eyes, had stormed those walls without permission, and worse, he realized he did not want to push her out. Their war had changed shape. What began as arrogance and defiance had become a dance of fire and shadows, a dangerous rhythm neither could control. Sophie swore she hated him, yet her heart betrayed her with every tremor. Nathan swore he only wanted silence, yet he found himself craving the very voice that tore him apart. And as their hearts beat in secret rebellion, fate had already drawn them tighter into its web. This was no longer a battle of words. It was the beginning of surrender, wrapped in fury, blazing with desire, and trembling on the edge of something both healing and terrifying. The quiet of Sunday morning was supposed to be Sophie's sanctuary. She had planned to water her balcony plants, sip her coffee, and lose herself in the healing silence of dawn. But when she slid open the glass door and stepped outside, her gaze collided with the last person she wanted to see. Across the narrow gap between their balconies, Nathan stood in a plain white shirt, sleeves rolled casually, a cup of black coffee in his hand. His presence felt like an intrusion upon her peace, yet he looked so calm, as if the world and her fury could never touch him. Sophie froze, watering can in hand, irritation bristling through her veins. "Of course," she muttered under her breath. "Even the sky can't give me one morning without him." Nathan lifted his cup slightly, a gesture of acknowledgement that was infuriatingly polite. "At least you're watering them properly this time," he said, his voice deep and maddeningly calm. "Yesterday you spilled half the water on the floor." Sophie's head snapped up, her cheeks flushing. "Were you spying on me?" His lips curved faintly. "No, I just have good eyesight." Her chest tightened, torn between indignation and the strange flutter she could not silence. She turned away quickly, whispering to herself words of calm, forcing the healing rhythm of breath to steady her pounding heart. In the days that followed, living across from Nathan became nothing short of a nightmare. Morning after morning, she stepped into the elevator, only to find him already inside, leaning against the wall with effortless arrogance. The space felt unbearably small, the silence thick with tension. Sophie crossed her arms, eyes fixed on the glowing numbers above the door. Nathan barely glanced at her, but she felt his presence like a storm pressing close, filling every fragile inch of air. "Going down to the garage," he murmured one morning, his tone flat. "Or just standing here to block the way?" She glared at him, her lips parting to snap, but her voice faltered against the steady calm of his gaze. She told herself she hated him. Yet when the doors slid open and she stepped out, her chest ached with the dangerous rhythm of wanting to stay. Evenings became their battlefield too. Taking out the trash should have been simple, but Nathan always seemed to appear at the exact same time, a black bag in his hand, his tall frame filling the narrow hallway. They stood facing each other, locked in silent standoffs, neither willing to move first. "You go ahead," Sophie insisted. "No," Nathan replied with infuriating calm. "You first. You're the neighbor who talks the most. I'll wait." Her teeth clenched, her eyes blazing. "Fine. But don't think this means you win." She stormed toward the elevator, her heels clicking against the floor. Nathan followed at a steady pace, the faintest curve at his lips, as though her fury was the only thing that gave him life. And yet, for all the annoyance, Sophie began to notice the cracks. Nathan, who lived in silence like a fortress, seemed to linger outside more than necessary. When she laughed with her friend Julia in the hallway, Sophie caught him glancing up from his phone, his expression unreadable. On the balcony, when she muttered complaints under her breath, she sometimes glimpsed a flicker of amusement in his dark eyes. It unsettled her, the way he seemed less like the untouchable CEO and more like a man quietly savoring her chaos. The turning point came at a bar lit with golden light and humming with laughter. Julia had dragged Sophie out, promising a night of relaxation and harmless fun. Instead, Sophie found herself cornered by a blind date, her friends eagerly watching. Desperate to escape, she blurted, "I already have a boyfriend." The table erupted in surprise. Julia's eyes widened, demanding proof. And then fate delivered the cruelest twist. The door swung open, and Nathan Blackwood walked in, his dark shirt unbuttoned at the collar, his presence drawing every eye in the room. Sophie's heart plummeted. Before she could deny anything, Julia waved excitedly. "Is that him?" Every head turned. Nathan's gaze locked onto hers, a smirk tugging at his lips, as though the universe had played directly into his hands. He strode toward her table, laid a hand on her shoulder, and announced smoothly, "Yes, I'm her boyfriend." The bar erupted in cheers, the air buzzing with excitement. Sophie sat frozen, mortified, her cheeks blazing. Nathan slid into the seat beside her, draping his arm casually over the back of her chair, as though he had always belonged there. "What are you doing?" she hissed under her breath. "Coincidence," he murmured, eyes glinting. "Or maybe fate." Through the night, he played the role flawlessly, answering her friends' questions with disarming charm, leaning close to whisper remarks that made the table laugh, acting as though he had known Sophie for years. She wanted to hate him for it, but her heart betrayed her with every stolen glance, every brush of his shoulder against hers. Then came Julia's playful challenge. "If you're really dating, prove it with a kiss." Sophie nearly choked, but Nathan didn't hesitate. He turned, his eyes locking on hers, and in front of everyone he leaned in and kissed her. It was brief, soft, lingering just enough to burn her soul. And though she told herself it was just pretend, Sophie's heart stumbled, betraying the truth. It had not felt like an act at all. When the night ended and the crowd dissolved, Sophie found herself walking home beside him, the cool night air doing little to calm the storm inside her chest. Nathan was silent, his hands in his pockets, but every step closer to their building felt like a tether pulling them tighter together. At the elevator, Sophie finally blurted, "Thanks for helping me out." Nathan arched a brow, his lips curving faintly. "For the kiss?" Her cheeks flushed crimson. "For saving me from that ridiculous setup," she corrected, her voice too sharp to disguise the tremor beneath it. He gave the faintest smile, rare and unguarded. "So, you can say thank you after all." She glared, turning quickly to hide the pounding of her heart. But once inside her apartment, leaning against the closed door, Sophie whispered a truth she could not bear to admit aloud. Every clash, every kiss, every maddening word from him was no longer just torment. It was healing, too, in a way she could not explain, because for the first time in years, her heart felt awake, alive, caught in a storm that might break her, yet also piece her together again. And across the hall, Nathan leaned against his own door, his lips still curved in that faint smile, his chest aching with something he had long believed impossible. He had kissed her to silence her once, to control the chaos she brought into his world. But now, chaos was the very thing he craved, and deep within, he knew he was already lost to her, addicted to the fire she carried, to the healing hidden inside her storm. The days after the bar incident blurred into a rhythm Sophie could neither control nor escape. Every morning, she told herself it had all been a performance, a cruel coincidence, a convenient lie to save face in front of her friends. But every night, when she laid her head on the pillow, she felt again the warmth of Nathan's lips against hers, that brief kiss that should have meant nothing, yet left a trail of fire across her heart. She tried to heal herself with simple rituals, watering her plants, brewing coffee, burying her focus in manuscripts, but none of them silenced the storm inside. His presence across the hall, steady and unrelenting, made her defenses tremble. Nathan, too, felt the shift. He had kissed Sophie before to shut her up, to win an argument, to seize control. But at that table, under the golden lights and watchful eyes, the kiss had felt different. It wasn't an act. It wasn't silence. It was something raw. Something that tightened in his chest long after the applause had faded. For the first time in years, he questioned whether he was still the man who lived only for numbers, strategy, and control. Sophie's laughter, her stubbornness, her endless talking, had begun to echo in the hollow places of his life, filling cracks he hadn't even realized existed. One evening, Sophie returned late from work, her body weary, her heart heavy. She stepped into the elevator, and, of course, there he was, leaning against the wall, sleeves rolled up, collar undone. He looked tired, shadows under his eyes, yet somehow even more disarming in that unguarded state. "Long day?" he asked, his voice gentler than usual. Sophie blinked, thrown off by the softness, and nodded. "Yes. What about you?" "Don't CEOs drown in contracts and meetings?" His lips curved faintly. "True. But today didn't feel so bad." His gaze lingered on her face, unspoken words flickering in the silence. Sophie turned away, her heart tripping, and cursed herself for the tremor in her breath. Later that week, The universe's cruel humor struck again. The elevator shuddered mid-ascent, jolting to a stop. Sophie panicked, her fingers jabbing the buttons, but nothing worked. The confined space closed in, suffocating, until Nathan's voice steadied the air. "Relax. It's just a malfunction." She shot him a glare. "Easy for you to say. I hate being trapped." His eyes softened, his tone lowering. "When I was a boy, I was stuck in an elevator for 3 hours. Alone. Since then, I've never liked closed spaces." Sophie froze, her anger quieted by the rawness of his confession. For the first time, she saw not the cold CEO, but a man scarred by loneliness. Her voice softened, warm as a balm. "Well, this time, you're not alone." The silence that followed was heavy, tender, a healing pause neither dared to break. When the doors finally opened, they stepped out without a word. But Sophie carried the moment like a fragile ember glowing inside her. From then on, their encounters shifted. The quarrels remained, the teasing sharp as ever, but in the cracks between arguments, something new bloomed. One night, Sophie stood on her balcony, sipping wine under the stars. Across the way, Nathan leaned on his railing, whiskey in hand. Their eyes met, and instead of fire, there was quiet warmth. "Seems like you've got more free time than I thought," Sophie teased. Nathan's lips curved faintly. "Or maybe I just have different ways of unwinding, like watching my noisy neighbor." Her cheeks flushed, but she hid it behind a sip of wine. "If I bother you so much, you can always move." His answer was steady, his gaze unwavering. "No, I'm getting used to it. In fact, I think I might even enjoy it." Heat rushed to her cheeks, and for once Sophie had no retort. Yet fate was not content to let them linger in peace. A Friday evening found Sophie at a small Italian restaurant with Liam, her colleague. Liam's warmth was easy, his humor light, a welcome relief from the tension that had become her daily life. For a while, Sophie's laughter rang free, her heart easing as candlelight flickered across the table. But the moment she tilted her head back in laughter, the door opened, and Nathan appeared. He stood still, his dark eyes stormy as they locked onto her, his jaw tight, his body taut with something primal. Sophie's smile faltered, her chest constricting as he strode forward. "Coincidence?" Nathan said smoothly when she stammered his name, though his eyes betrayed him. Liam rose politely, introducing himself, but Nathan's handshake was too firm, his stare too intense. Without invitation, he slid into the empty seat beside Sophie, his presence swallowing the space. Sophie seethed. "This is my dinner." His reply was low, sharp. "Ours. You're the lead editor on a project I'm funding. That makes every dinner potentially business." Fury burned her cheeks, but beneath it pulsed an unsteady rhythm. Jealousy. His. The meal was torture. Liam tried to keep the conversation flowing, but Nathan's interruptions cut like blades. When Liam praised Sophie for her composure, Nathan interjected, "Composed? I'd call her too loud." Sophie kicked him under the table, but he didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned close, his voice brushing her ear. "The angrier you get, the cuter you are." Her breath caught, her cheeks blazing. Liam excused himself early, sensing the storm he couldn't enter. The moment he left, Sophie turned on Nathan, fury trembling through her words. "Do you realize what you just did? You ruined my evening." Nathan's eyes glimmered with something unmasked, something raw. "Your evening? Or the evening where you smiled like that at another man?" He stopped himself, jaw tight, but the words were already between them, heavy and undeniable. Sophie's eyes widened. "You're jealous?" The silence that followed was scorching. Then, in one sudden motion, Nathan gripped her wrist, pulling her into a quiet corner. His voice was rough, his eyes dark with desperation. "You drive me insane, Sophie. Every time I see you smile at someone else, I can't stand it." Before she could reply, before she could summon her defenses, his lips crashed onto hers. This kiss was nothing like the others. It wasn't about silence or control. It was hunger, fear, longing all at once, his mouth claiming hers as though she were the only lifeline he had left. Sophie gasped, struggling for breath, but her body melted against him, her hands trembling against his chest, her lips responding in a betrayal of her fury. The world disappeared, leaving only the thundering of their hearts and the fire that consumed them both. When Nathan finally pulled back, his breath was ragged, his forehead resting against hers. "Don't let me see you with another man again," he whispered, raw and unguarded. Sophie's eyes flashed, her voice trembling with defiance. "You don't get to control me." He searched her face, and then, slowly, his lips curved into that crooked, dangerous smile. "Maybe not, but my heart doesn't listen." Sophie turned away, hiding the storm burning in her eyes. She wanted to hate him, to shove him aside, to erase every trace of him. Yet deep inside, her heart betrayed her again with a truth she could not silence. Nathan Blackwood, the cold, untouchable CEO, cared for her in a way no one ever had. And no matter how fiercely she fought it, she knew that truth was already unraveling her carefully built defenses, one kiss at a time. The night was heavy with silence when Sophie first overheard the whispers that would shift everything she thought she knew about Nathan Blackwood. She had gone back to Blackwood Technologies after hours, searching for a file, her footsteps echoing through the near-empty corridor. From the far end of the hallway, two employees' hushed voices carried, fragments of a story not meant for her ears. It's still about the time Nathan almost got married. His fiancée ran off with his business partner right before the engagement. That's why he turned so cold. Their words hit Sophie like a blade drawn slowly across her skin. She froze, her breath caught between disbelief and an ache she couldn't name. All this time she had thought Nathan's distance was arrogance, a choice. Now she realized it was a scar. That evening, back in her apartment, Sophie stood on her balcony with a steaming mug of tea cradled in her hands. The city glimmered below, its lights weaving golden threads through the dark. Across the narrow space, Nathan appeared, whiskey glass in hand, his eyes fixed on the skyline. For the first time, he didn't look like the untouchable CEO everyone feared. He looked like a man haunted by memories that clung like shadows. Sophie hesitated, then asked softly, "Can't sleep?" His head turned, surprise flickering in his eyes that she had spoken first. "Not tonight," he admitted quietly, his voice low, raw at the edges. Sophie's heart beat unevenly, courage pushing past her hesitation. Thinking about the past? She regretted the words as soon as they slipped out, afraid she had crossed an invisible line. But Nathan didn't grow angry. His eyes only darkened, his voice hushed, heavy. "What exactly did you hear?" Sophie swallowed, her fingers tightening around the warm mug. "Just a little. I wasn't trying to pry. I only want you to know I'm not here to laugh or pity. Everyone carries scars of their own." Silence fell between them, broken only by the faint rustle of the night wind. Nathan studied her face, as if searching for judgment, for weakness, but all he found was steady warmth in her gaze. And slowly, as though each word cost him, he let the truth spill out. "I once believed in absolute love. I was ready to give everything. And the woman I trusted most left me. For my partner. She didn't just take my heart. She took my faith in people. Since then, I've kept walls so high no one could touch me." Sophie's throat tightened, her chest aching at the rawness in his voice. "Scars don't make you weaker, Nathan. They're proof of how strong you've been to survive. You have every right to guard yourself. But you also have the right to open your heart when the right person comes along." For a long moment, Nathan said nothing. He just stared at her. The man who never allowed cracks in his armor, now stripped bare by the sincerity in her eyes. Something shifted in his chest, a weight lifting, an unfamiliar lightness breaking through. His lips curved faintly, a rare softness touching his gaze. "You're strange, Sophie Turner," he murmured. Sophie smiled back, gentle as the night breeze. "And you, Nathan Blackwood, are just very good at hiding." No more words were needed. Just two balconies, two souls once at war, now quietly bound by an unspoken thread. Sophie stepped back inside, her heart trembling, knowing she had glimpsed the man behind the mask. Nathan remained outside, eyes lingering on the glow of her window long after it went dark. For the first time in years, he felt not judged, not mocked, but understood. And that single truth, small yet vast, began to heal the wound he had carried alone for so long. But healing never comes without trial. Days later, Sophie walked into the sleek marble lobby of Blackwood Technologies, arms full of manuscripts, only to see him standing near the reception lounge, and beside him, draped in elegance, was a striking blonde in a silk dress. Sophie didn't need an introduction. She knew Elena Moore, the former fiancée, the ghost of his past. Sophie's heart clenched as she watched Elena press a hand against Nathan's chest, leaning close with a smile too sweet, too familiar. Nathan frowned, shifting back. But before he could fully step away, Eleanor wrapped her arms around him, her lips brushing his cheek. Sophie's breath shattered. Her chest tightened with a pain sharp enough to leave her trembling. She had given herself permission to believe in him, to believe in the man she saw beyond the armor, and now here was the proof her heart dreaded. Perhaps he had never let go of the woman who had betrayed him. Nathan turned, his eyes catching Sophie's just as she spun away, her heels striking fire across the floor as she fled. Her words burst out before she could stop them, sharp, cutting. "Sorry to interrupt. I must have come at the wrong time." She didn't wait for his answer. The sight of him standing there, frozen, with his past draped against him like a chain, was enough to break her fragile trust. That night, in the solitude of her apartment, Sophie sat staring at untouched pages, her thoughts unraveling. Every word he had spoken on that balcony, every rare softness he had shown, now felt like a lie. She whispered to herself that she had been foolish, that she had let healing turn into hope, only to be wounded again. Across the hall, Nathan stood outside her door, his hand pressed to the cold wood, his voice rough with desperation. "Sophie, what you saw wasn't what it seemed. She doesn't matter to me anymore. The only person I want to hold on to is you." But Sophie sat on the other side, her back against the door, tears burning her cheeks, whispering through trembling lips, "You already lost me." Her words were meant for herself, but through the silence they carried into the air like a vow. Nathan closed his eyes, his chest aching with the weight of every wall he had built, and every crack Sophie had managed to carve into them. He had thought scars made him safe, untouchable. But now he understood the truth. Scars don't keep you safe. They only remind you of what you fear losing most. And this time, it was Sophie, her fire, her voice, her healing presence, that he was terrified of losing forever. Sophie woke to the weight of whispers before she even stepped into the office that morning. The publishing house buzzed with a strange, suffocating tension, eyes flicking toward her as though she carried an invisible brand. When she reached her desk, a folded newspaper already lay waiting. Her heart sank as the headline glared back at her. Editor Sophie Turner advances her career through romantic ties with CEO Nathan Blackwood. Beneath it, a grainy photo showed her and Nathan leaving a restaurant, his dark eyes fixed on her as though the world didn't exist. The ink on the page felt like poison seeping into her skin. Sophie's blood boiled, not from shame, but from the bitter sting of injustice. Every word she had fought for, every sleepless night bent over manuscripts, every drop of effort she had poured into her work, reduced in an instant to gossip and lies. By midday, the boardroom filled with restless voices, shareholders shifting in their seats, glances sharp with suspicion. Sophie sat tall, though her stomach churned. Her voice was steady, clear, her gaze unflinching. "You have every right to doubt me," she said, "but I will prove myself through results. This project will answer for me." It wasn't defiance. It was conviction, born of pride and pain. When the meeting adjourned, Sophie returned to her desk with fire in her veins. That night, the lights in her apartment burned until dawn. Manuscripts covered the table, red ink staining every page as she poured herself into her work with relentless precision. She skipped meals, ignored calls, let sleep slip away, all because her only weapon against the shadows cast over her was her own brilliance. Nathan came knocking more than once, his voice low behind her door, insisting he wanted to defend her, to make a statement, to shield her from the storm. But Sophie's voice, firm and wounded, cut through. "I don't need you to speak for me. This is my battle." And she was right. When the book launched, the response was overwhelming. Sales shattered projections. Reviews praised its careful craftsmanship, and Sophie's name spread across industry magazines, not as Nathan Blackwood's lover, but as a formidable editor whose touch turned words into fire. For the first time in weeks, her heart eased with the healing comfort of vindication. But the press wasn't finished. Rumors persisted, sharp as knives, demanding Nathan's response. And so, at the press conference for the project, the world turned its gaze on him. Sophie waited backstage, her heart hammering, afraid of what he might say, afraid he would speak words that might undo everything she had rebuilt. When he stepped into the lights, tall and unyielding in his dark suit, the room hushed to silence. Cameras flashed like lightning as he faced the crowd. "There are rumors," Nathan began, his voice steady, resonant, carrying through every corner of the hall, "that Sophie Turner advanced her career because of a personal relationship with me." His pause stretched, the silence sharp enough to cut. "Let me be clear. Sophie doesn't need me to shine. Her talent, her determination, her brilliance are what made this project a success." He exhaled softly, his gaze shifting, locking on the cameras, as if speaking to the world itself. "If anyone here is dependent on someone else, then it's me who cannot live without her." The air shattered. Reporters gasped, shutters exploded in rapid fire, voices clashed in disbelief. Sophie trembled backstage, her chest tight, her eyes stinging with tears she couldn't hold back. His words were more than defense. They were confession, vulnerable, raw, and irreversibly public. Nathan Blackwood, the man who built his life on silence and walls of steel, had just torn them all down for her. When the conference ended, the noise still ringing in her ears, Sophie found herself face to face with him backstage. His eyes, usually sharp and distant, were stripped bare. His voice, low and rough, trembled at the edges. "I'm not good at apologies, but today I said everything I needed to." "Sophie, do you believe me now?" Her lips parted, but no words came. Instead, her gaze held his, shimmering with unspoken emotion, a storm of fear, relief, and something dangerously close to surrender. Days later, Blackwood Corporation hosted a celebration for the project's success. The ballroom glowed beneath crystal chandeliers, laughter and music weaving together in a golden haze. Sophie stood quietly in a corner, a glass of wine in her hand, still unaccustomed to the admiring glances and whispered praise. This wasn't her world. She belonged to paper, ink, the quiet intimacy of words, not to flashing lights and endless chatter. But before she could slip away, the host called Nathan onto the stage. He stood tall, commanding as always, but when his eyes swept the room, they stopped only on her. "Tonight we celebrate success," he said, his deep voice rolling like thunder softened by velvet. "But it didn't come from me, or from Blackwood Corporation. It came from one person." He raised his hand, pointing directly to Sophie, his gaze burning with quiet devotion. "Sophie Turner." The crowd erupted in applause, heads turning toward her. Sophie froze, her cheeks flushing, her pulse pounding, but Nathan's steady gaze pulled her forward. She stepped onto the stage, her hands trembling as he clasped one firmly, anchoring her. Cameras flashed, whispers rippled, but Nathan's voice silenced them all. "Many of you have heard the rumors, but the truth is this: she doesn't need me to shine. I need her." His voice dropped, softer, but carrying weight. "That kiss back then, I meant only to silence her. But from that moment on, I've never stopped searching for her lips." The ballroom exploded into gasps, cameras firing like fireworks, but Sophie heard none of it. Her world had shrunk to the man standing beside her, his words wrapping around her heart like fire and balm all at once. Before she could breathe, Nathan pulled her into his arms and kissed her, deep and consuming, a kiss that wasn't about silence or control, but about surrender. Sophie trembled, stunned, then slowly let her eyes close, her lips softening beneath his as her heart finally allowed itself to fall. Applause thundered around them, but all Sophie heard was the healing rhythm of his breath against hers, the unshakable truth in the way his hands held her as though he would never let go. When he drew back, his forehead rested against hers, his voice low enough for only her to hear. "You don't have to answer me now. Just know this. I'm not hiding anymore." Her cheeks burned crimson, her lips trembling into the faintest smile. For the first time, she let herself admit it. "You're insane. But maybe, so am I." The room erupted again, the world spinning with cheers, but Sophie no longer cared. In that moment, all she felt was the warmth of his embrace, the healing she had fought against for so long, and the quiet truth that love, fragile, fierce, terrifying, had finally broken through every wall between them. A year later, the spring sun streamed softly through tall windows, spilling golden warmth across polished wood floors and white curtains fluttering in the breeze. In the kitchen of their shared apartment, the scent of butter and sugar filled the air, carrying with it the tender promise of ordinary happiness. Sophie stood at the counter in a floral apron, her hair tied back loosely, her hands dusted with flour as she kneaded dough. Her voice, bright and unrestrained, tumbled through the air like a melody Nathan had learned to crave. She spoke of almond flour, of French cakes she wanted to try, of a book she had read the night before. To anyone else, it might have seemed like noise. To Nathan, it was healing, an endless stream of warmth that stitched itself into the quiet cracks of his once lonely life. In the living room, he sat with an open novel in his lap, but his eyes lingered more on her than the words on the page. A year ago, silence had been his fortress. Now, her voice was the only soundtrack he never wanted to end. He rose quietly, setting the book aside, and walked toward her. Sophie bent to slide a tray of golden pastries from the oven, the steam curling around her face, lighting her with a glow that stole his breath. For a moment, he simply stood there, watching her with the reverence of a man who had discovered something rarer than fortune: peace. Then, without warning, he stepped behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. Sophie laughed, startled, though her hands still held the tray. "Nathan, you scared me." Her voice wavered with amusement, the sound soft and sweet. He bent down, brushing his lips against her neck, inhaling the warmth of flour, butter, and her. She tilted her head, caught between a laugh and a sigh, her heart beating in rhythm with his. "Do you smell the butter?" she chattered on, trying to steady herself. "I think I finally got the ratio right this time. Oh, and if we add a touch of almond, maybe—" Her words cut off as Nathan turned her gently, kissed her, and silenced her in the way he loved most. This kiss was no longer battle or defiance, no longer about power or silence. It was devotion, deep and lingering, a promise carried in the press of his lips. Sophie melted against him, her flour-dusted fingers curling against his shirt, the scent of pastries mingling with the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. When he finally pulled back, his forehead rested against hers, his voice low, husky, tender. "I'm addicted to you. And for the rest of my life, Sophie, I don't ever want to quit." Her cheeks flushed pink, her eyes bright with tears that weren't sorrow, but the kind that bloom when the heart is too full. She mock-glared at him, her lips curving. "You're hopeless, a heavy addict." Nathan chuckled, brushing a kiss over the tip of her nose. "Then I'll be addicted forever." She laughed outright, wrapping her arms around him, holding on as though she never planned to let go. Her laughter filled the apartment, warm and healing, blending with the faint hum of the city below, weaving a private symphony of love and belonging. The pastries cooled on the counter, forgotten, as they stood tangled in each other's arms. Outside, the world rushed on. Traffic, meetings, deadlines, noise. But in that small kitchen, time stilled. There was only the warmth of two souls who had fought through storms, healed each other's wounds, and learned that love was not the absence of scars, but the courage to live with them together. Sophie pressed her cheek to Nathan's chest, listening to the steady beat beneath her ear, and whispered with a smile, "This is enough. Just you, just us, just this." Nathan closed his eyes, his arms tightening around her, and let the truth wash over him like sunlight. He had once believed silence was safety, walls were strength, solitude was freedom. But now he knew home wasn't a place or a fortress. Home was Sophie, with her endless chatter, her fiery defiance, her healing laughter, her lips he could never resist. She had become the rhythm of his days, the quiet of his nights, the reason his heart beat at all. And as spring stretched its gentle hand through the windows, they kissed again, slow and unhurried, carrying with it the promise of every morning still to come. It wasn't grand gestures or lavish wealth that defined their love. It was the simple, ordinary miracle of being together, of knowing that no matter how the world shifted, they had found in each other something unshakable. If this story touched your heart, if it brought you even a moment of warmth or healing, I invite you to share your thoughts below. Leave a like, write a comment, and subscribe so more souls can join this journey. Every word you share becomes part of this love. Every gesture of support keeps these stories alive. And maybe, just maybe, as Sophie and Nathan discovered, we all need reminders that love, fragile, fiery, healing, is the most powerful story of all.